Hello, Tennessee Voices viewers and listeners. This is David Plazas, the Opinion and Engagement Director for the USA Today Network Tennessee and the Tennessean. Today, I'm very excited to have two guests on the show. We have Kia Jarmon and Lisa Swift-Young, who are both philanthropy advisors. And we're talking today about the Give Black, Give Back philanthropy campaign. Kia and Lisa, how are you doing today?
Great. How about you? Glad to be here.
I'm so glad to have you both here. And I put a shout out to my colleague, LeBron Hill, who had Kia on first in his show before me. So I'm so glad, though, that you came on Tennessee Voices.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I love the Tennessean and have a long tenured history with you all. So I'm so glad to be with you.
Absolutely. Well, I'd like for you to talk to me about Black philanthropy. What is the campaign about?
So it's a three-part mission. Specifically, we talk, our mission is sort of a threefold process, and we sort of look at amplifying Black voices. That's probably the first thing. A lot of people don't see philanthropy as being something that Black people can embody, right? So I think one of the things we kind of started off this whole process was about people always seeing Black people as receivers and not givers. And our history is very, very long and deep as far as philanthropy is concerned. So amplifying Black voices is sort of one of the first things we kind of talk about. Another place that we really spend a lot of time is also advancing Black-led foundations and nonprofits. When we look in the philanthropy space specifically, they are severely underfunded. I mean, some numbers will, I don't know, maybe not shock you, but they are significantly underfunded. The recent study was like 74% less than their white counterparts as far as funding is concerned. So we wanted to bring attention to the fact there are Black funds out there, there are Black nonprofits, and for them to be Black-led being something specifically around that in particular. And then last but not least, we want to talk about the wealth gap. There is a significant wealth gap in this country around for African Americans versus white counterparts. And so we want to have that legacy of giving, along with that fact that we actually have something to give, in that respect. So that wealth piece is really, really important.
Thank you very much. And Kia, I know you've done a lot of work in the community and nonprofits, affordable housing, North Nashville. Could you talk a little bit about your role and your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So Lisa, just to back up and give a little history, Lisa and I came together back in 2019, right before the pandemic happened, and began really having the conversation about why this was so important to amplify. Philanthropy is often thought of as the thing that's on the side of a building, your name, your legacy, your last name. And we really want to encourage people to think about philanthropy as your time, talent, treasure, truth, or testimony. And that's something that the Black community has always had, one of those five things. But in particular, the treasure part, we have $11 billion of annual giving that outpaces our white counterparts. We also know that the frequency in which we give is greater amounts. Now, our disposable income is going to be different. So the amount of the gift is going to be smaller, but the frequency and the way we give. But $11 billion with a B is magnificent. And as Lisa would say, who I always count on as our statistician, when you think about the valuation of some of our largest companies in the world, some of them don't have a valuation of $11 billion, but annually. And so then we have the other areas. What we're doing here is sharing our truth and our testimony. And so that's what we do as much as possible, is really amplifying that voice. But time, one thing that we often think about with the nonprofits, the things that you mentioned, is we often want to write a check. That's really great. We want checks. But we also know that time is precious because it never comes back to you. You only ever keep moving forward. But money, you could always find ways to make more money or to get more money, whether it's selling your wares on eBay or it's working extra hours at work. You can always find a way to do that, but you cannot get that really precious commodity back of time. And then, of course, talent is that very often we try to separate philanthropy from our vocation. It doesn't have to be. You also may have a talent that you operate within sitting in your office or that even you haven't been able to express or experience. And we want to be able to also utilize that as a part of philanthropy also.
I love that, the time, talent, treasure, truth, or testimonies. That's great to really remind people of that. You know, what some of the work that we've done over the last couple of years, particularly with my colleague LeBron, as we've been doing the Black Tennessee Voices campaign, has been about, you know, after the blackout, after Blackout Tuesday, following George Floyd's murder, there was a concern of sustainability when it came to investment. You know, people said they wanted to invest, they wanted to be part of the solution. And some polling, some of it has been promising, but others has been a little bit scary because there's been a little bit of a pushback. How do you think we, you know, as a community can come together to really sustain that effort, which I think is extremely important?
So one of the things in particular, I think I did a TED Talk recently, why you should savor giving if you want to see the whole thing. And the talk specifically talks around that piece. And it talks about how charity is not really change. Charity is actually helping someone in their situation, which is what we were doing in that situation. But philanthropy is helping someone out of their situation. So really having that piece of, sometimes people get, you know, that a very emotional response of charity. Like, I see someone in crisis, you know, empathy kind of jumps in there and you act, but you didn't really do anything to actually change the situation. So for sustainability, philanthropy really has to be employed, and we need to engage in philanthropy, which will actually include the people, first of all, who are dealing with the issue, because you can't really help someone unless you're part of that situation or you invite them in. And then we want sustainable. So philanthropy is really about changing the paradigm for that person and helping someone out of that situation, so that we move to a case like you mentioned in George Floyd, where we're talking about what are we doing specifically around the structures that cause the problem. Desmond Tutu has a saying. He's like, we got to stop just pulling people from the river. We got to go upstream and find out why they keep falling in. And philanthropy, that to me explains exactly that whole charity versus philanthropy. So for sustainability, we believe that philanthropy is really the vehicle that people should be engaging in and being more intentional about how they give.
I love that title, savoring giving. You know, that whole notion of really that there's an emotional connection with giving. And, you know, when you gave that, you know, what were you hoping, if you were to let the audience stay with one or two thoughts, what were the things that you really wanted them to come away with?
In the TED Talk, I really kind of focus in on that, just specifically being more intentional, being more mindful. You know, there's a whole philosophy now about mindfulness, and like that sort of being in the moment and really paying attention and savoring and thinking about, how could this gift really change generations? How could what I'm doing right now actually have an impact? And how it's really super simple to do that. And we talk about with Black philanthropy specifically, that we've always been doing that with the 5 T's that we call. But how do you be more intentional? How do you move beyond just that emotional, oh my goodness, this is something I want to do, to something I actually want to change, and how I help them out of it. So the two things would be like, you know, being mindful about giving. I give you some very specific, you know, actions on how to do that. I tell you a little bit about how I got in philanthropy because of a situation that sort of catalyzed everything for me. So yeah, that would be probably the two pieces.
Thank you, Kia. And one of the things that I've noticed is that, you know, the nonprofit community has had to reckon with itself as well for historical issues. Would you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, the nonprofit industrial complex is another term, maybe a nicer term for really white supremacy in our country. And what that looks like is what Lisa was talking about that charity piece, where organizations have really been keeping people in their situation, and they've worked with they've conspired with other actors like the government, and also some politicians who are looking to keep people, you know, in such negative places. What Lisa said about the Desmond Tutu quote about people falling in, it actually would be people being thrown in to those situations. And so the question is also how we get people out of that situation, but also how do we figure out how to penalize those people who are throwing them in? So the nonprofit industrial complex has really been harmful to a lot of people, particularly Black individuals, Black organizations. There's another stat, I believe it's between 1% and 3%. If you give your money to a large white organization, only 1 or 3% of that is going to go to actually smaller Black-led nonprofits. But we also know that a great majority of the people that they are working on behalf of are Black and brown individuals. And so it's really been incumbent upon Lisa and I to shine a light on that complex and really moving us out of the charitable gifts. I recognize the challenge because the government considers it charitable when you do your taxes. It's a charitable donation. When you file your taxes as the organization, you're a charitable organization. But charity really is about making a person feel good about the gift. Philanthropy is the discomfort. It's about how we can make the system shake a little bit, how we can make redistribute power, and how we can make sure that all people have access, particularly those who have been historically excluded and historically harmed in some way in our country. And of course, we have to look at the Black community when we're talking about that historical harm.
Thank you for that. Before we continue on this really important thread, I always like to ask my guests midway if they would talk a little bit about what they've been doing to cope. And the reason I think this is important is because leaders have so much on their plates and so much on their shoulders that they often forget to take care of themselves. So what do you do for self-care? What are you reading? What are you watching? What are you doing?
Well, I think for me, so here's a little bit different for me. I gotta go with that. So in the talk, I actually talk about this as well. So my family, my mom's side of the family is a very, very integral part of the civil rights movement. They are the most arrested civil rights family the most arrested civil rights family. So for me, it's sort of like taking the time to step back and say, how do I want to come out of this differently? And I think for me, the optimism comes is like all the different things that are happening now, like, whether or not we're on a Zoom or whether or not we're, I'm getting more exercise, I'm walking more, I'm really being intentional about how I want my life to live, to be. And I think before the pandemic, we were just running, like you just are kind of like you show up and you just do what you got to do. And I think the pandemic for me really has been an opportunity for me to step back and say, what is my contribution? What is my legacy going to be? And really having intentional steps to do that. So for me, it's been a lot of reading, a lot of drinking, a lot more water. I think just really basic stuff that I think in the hustle and bustle, I wasn't doing because it was, we were just running with it. So it's been hard. We've lost a lot of people, so I'm not at all insensitive to that. But I think I've been able to reach out to so many people and have conversations with them that I think without the pandemic, I would not have stopped to actually make that time. So that's been really enriching to me is literally giving back has been the way that I actually process everything and make it okay.
Thank you for that. How about you, Kia?
Yeah, on a very basic level, like right now, I'm watching Celebrity Big Brother. So that's been very interesting to watch people, reality stars and actors and so forth, be very silly. I also lean very heavily into Black joy as my resistance. Very often, I keep beside my desk a series of Jim Crow etiquette laws. And it talks about a variety of places in which Black people can't take up space. And so I, with my young son, like to take up a lot of space. We do a lot of traveling. We go as many places as we can. It's called Mommy and Teddy Adventure. And we spend as much time being free and be as you can with a mask on, but being free and try not to catch cooties as much as possible, because that is something that my ancestors and even my living elders have not always been able to do. And so that resistance has brought me a lot of joy during this time and before, but that's really my self-care during this moment.
Thank you very much. And as we were talking, both of you, I was reflecting upon a trip to Montgomery, Alabama a couple of weeks ago that I took to the Legacy Museum, and realizing how much, I haven't been taught, how much so many of us haven't been taught about the reality of the oppression. And when you talk about the Jim Crow laws, I have a copy of a quiz, a poll quiz, such as, guess how many jelly beans are in this particular stack, as a serious question. And I think, sometimes that lack of understanding is what causes people not to be empathetic, thinking like we've fixed everything. We fixed everything 50 years ago. What happened? And how do you respond when you hear that kind of language?
I think for me, I think one of the things is that, Kia and I do a lot of research and she mentioned I'm sort of the statistician from that standpoint. I still continue to find things that are inequitable, right, from that piece. And so I think those are the things that sort of keep you, I mean, you kind of, it's not over, right? I can show you multiple examples, even in today's terms, in today's money, that have significantly impacted the way that African Americans have been allowed to move in this space. We have broken a ton of barriers, as I mentioned. There's a lot of success, a lot of Black joy, a lot of great opportunities. We had our first Black president. We have a lot of things to be really grateful for. But I think that people mistake for thinking that that exceptionalism is what that proves that everything is okay because we have these exceptional examples. But the truth of the matter is the majority of us are still really in a place of struggle and still in a place of disadvantage and really in a place of inequity.
Yeah, I'll lean into that a little bit more. I often tell people, because I do a lot of teaching around race and racism and equity and justice and liberation. And I often tell people, go find the Black writers, go find the Indigenous writers, go find the women. Those are usually people who have not had the opportunity to take information to market. White men take information to market. I say that because if you read those writings, you would understand just how much we have been here and how long we will stay here, because the truth prevails in those writings. But very often, again, what we see on our bestseller list, and I'm talking really before people woke up to the unfortunate murder of George Floyd, there were many other people that we've seen be murdered and many more who have been murdered since then. So if the impetus is George Floyd, I encourage people to move past that particular moment, go back and go forward, because there's lots of other people who we are seeing in real time every day making unfortunate history that we continue to repeat. And so go and read those writers, go, for the purpose of this, go and look at the Black voices, go and look at the Latino voices. Those conversations with those particular people are the truth tellers. So when we talk about philanthropy, we talk about truth, we carry the truth in our DNA. And when we don't go back and research, we are bound to keep repeating the mistruths or the untruths of our world. And so we're just really committed to making sure that we don't continue to do that. So we're always researching, always bringing forward information for that reason.
There's an interesting question that's come out of the power poll. It's a poll that's sometimes sent over to people about the spirit of Nashville, giving all the new entrants. And one of my specialties over the last couple of years has been affordable housing. And the concern, really the alarm about the boom is great if you can afford it. And yet so many people can't afford it. And it creates, it exacerbates a lot of the issues that we've talked about here. And especially when you look at the history of redlining, I think, I know with the research that you both do that you're very well aware, but if you could articulate to our audience a little bit about that legacy, because we know that housing leads to better health outcomes, housing leads to better schools, all these things, but this is being disrupted as we speak right now in Nashville.
Well, one of the things that's interesting, if you look at, the interest rate, well, not interest rates, the housing costs in Nashville has exploded, for lack of a better word. But if you look at specific geographic zip codes, you can see that the percentages are not equal across the board. And that was by design. So if someone thinks redlining has ended, then you have to only go back a few years, or you can go look at the zip codes now and say, what percentage has gone up in Franklin versus has gone up in North Nashville? The percentages are significantly different. And so I'm not saying that to say that that's, a good thing, but the point being is that even just in that, African Americans who bought homes in traditionally Black areas, they have not reaped the same benefits as those who bought them in other areas. So that was designed specifically. So now that we have this boom, they're not able to actually embrace and enjoy all the opportunities. Homes that were, $200,000 in, East Nashville are being, knocked over, and when two tall skinnies are being put up for $500,000 a piece. But the property is so devalued before gentrification came that they really didn't reap the benefits of owning those homes for generations. So I mean, that's an example you can look at right now. You can look at housing prices and percentages. They've gone up over the past 5 years, and you'll see the disparities.
Mhm. Yeah, when we talk about Nashville being an it city, I'm often asking people as a Nashvilleian, who is it for? Another document I keep close by my desk is this community resilience framework, and it requires for us to have responsible governance, strong economy, a prepared system, and quality of life. The unfortunate part is that we're missing, if not all of those, at least 3 out of the 4 of those to have a really strong and resilient community. And it has been by design that those things have been out of whack. It is by design how Nashville became Nashville. People should Google that. It is by design that the highway went through North Nashville. That was by design because Memphis did not allow that same highway to happen for the reason they knew would happen here. It is by design we do not have a robust transit system. It is by design we don't have a healthy and fully funded education system. It is by design that we continue in this perpetual cycle of inviting people into the city without proper infrastructure. And so, of course, that's just by design. Don't even have to layer the race and racism into that. Once you layer that intersectional piece into it, then of course the historic harm squishes all of it together. And so we lack resilience in the strongest way. We are hanging on by a thread. I'd say the entire country, but in particular, because I'm from Nashville, we are hanging on by a thread. And if we don't do something very, very, very soon in a very radical and disruptive way, we're going to ensure that Nashville is what the world thinks that we are. See, the thing about it is we're no different than what the world believes. I traveled to DC one time and this gentleman said, "Where are you headed?" And I said, "I'm headed home." And he said, "Where is that?" I said, "I'm going to Nashville." He said, "Okay, and then where are you going next?" Because people believe, because we have systems and we have people, we have entities and institutions that send out their people into the world. Internationally, we have offices in other places that all tell a story about Nashville. We had a whole show called Nashville, and you saw what, 2, maybe 2 Black people on the show. So when that is the case, then there is this consistent misnomer that Nashville is not really what it is. It's not a reflection of what it is. So we're going to be who we want the world to think we are if we don't make a change really, really soon.
And as we're getting to the conclusion of the show, before I ask the final question, tell us how people can find out more about Give Black, Give Back.
First of all, you go to blackgivingback.com. There's a way on there to hear more about our story. You can also share your story, a philanthropy story as well. There's also a fund. So there's a fund there that is a Give Black, Give Back fund. And it basically is an opportunity, if you don't know which of the 40 funds that are at the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee that you want to participate in. Again, I would encourage people to engage in mindful giving or savoring giving. And so philanthropy, and if you're serious about making a change, philanthropy is definitely the way. So you can find our stories there. You can find links to us specifically. There's also a YouTube channel, so you can watch some of the conversations. We've done interviews with some change makers here in the Nashville community and globally as well, that will give you some insight to some of the challenges and also opportunities that are out there, that you can hear directly from the people who are actually being impacted. And that's, again, another piece where people sometimes will tell the story from their vantage point. This is now the story being told from the people who are actually engaged in it. So that would be where I would suggest people to go. Kia, I don't know if you have any other places that I missed.
Yeah, no, that's it. I mean, and you brought up nonprofits. Nonprofit leaders need to contact Lisa and I to come in and have this conversation with them. Because if we don't do that, then we will continue to, as Lisa mentioned, have Black people as seen as the recipient, and other populations or other demographics of people are somehow saving us, and we are not needed to be saved. We just want opportunity to couple to in our liberation so we can get together.
Yeah, so we invite corporations, especially who are looking into corporate social responsibility initiatives out there that are really looking for change specifically. So around social justice issues, that's where we sort of fall into space. So we encourage all of the companies, HCA, Bridgestone, any of the companies in the Nashville area who do not have a corporate social responsibility that is focused on specifically social justice, as Akia laid out all the different challenges that are occurring in this area. I think they should be bringing in people to find a little bit more about what's actually happening. We don't want to be talked to, we want to be a part of the conversation. And that's where our philanthropy practice kind of leans into, like, this is what you can do, and this will actually make a significant change in the landscape of Nashville and in the greater community.
Well, thank you so much. My guests today, of course, we have Kia Jarmon and also Lisa Swift Young, who are philanthropy advisors and who have been talking today about the Give Black, Give Back campaign. Again, go to giveblackgiveback.com, but I'll have it linked into our story there so you'll get it accurately. And before I let you go, I always like to ask my guests if they would leave our audience with some words of wisdom to help us continue coping with this challenging time.
Ooh. I would say take every opportunity as an opportunity to learn. There's a quote by Nelson Mandela that I basically live by. I never lose, I win or learn. And so every opportunity is an opportunity to, if you don't win, you can learn something. And so if people could embrace that, I think that we could have a better community. And even through this pandemic, learning, like, there are some things we probably should do virtually. So.
Yes, and mine would be teach your children. It's important that our young people, which is at this point all I can really invest in because they are our greatest asset in our community, teach your children about this conversation. Expose them, take them to Birmingham, take them to DC, let them see all of the monuments, all of the conversations, all the museums, and then have a dialogue with them about that, because my little son comes home and has those conversations with me. And so I want to make sure that all individuals are having this conversation so that we know that the investment in the Black community is not an afterthought. It's not a handout. It is an opportunity, again, for us to be seen as whole citizens in this world. And so teaching your children is a great way for them to grow up and be great global citizens alongside of my son.
Well, thank you, Kia. Thank you, Lisa. May you stay well and healthy. And again, I'm grateful for you coming on Tennessee Voices podcast today.
Thanks.